Welcome to the 28th episode of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Atobes, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give our hot takes as UTSA falls in the Frisco Bowl and throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for our listeners to love or hate. Let's get started. UTSA started out strong, but it wasn't enough to hold off San Diego State for a victory. On the first drive of the game, UTSA marched down the field, going 75 yards in 7 plays and ending in a touchdown catch by J.T. Clark. On the third drive, they added a rushing touchdown from Brendan Brady to take an early 14-7 lead. However, the Roadrunners allowed San Diego State to score 17 unanswered points before adding a 41-yard field goal to pull within one possession. The Roadrunners would score one more touchdown on a 4-yard pass to Franklin in the third quarter, but would be held scoreless in the fourth quarter, falling 38-24. Overall, the Roadrunners ended their season with a program record 12 wins, a Conference USA title, and many program firsts. But a program-first bowl victory, we'll have to wait for another season. So overall, what were your thoughts in the game?
I thought it was kind of odd from a UTSA point of view, mostly because I feel like the team just lacked discipline in so many aspects, which was bizarre because some of these things were things that were cleaned up this season as opposed to like last season when, you know, they had the same amount of penalties as they had during the Wilson years, right? It was like 7 to 8 penalties is what they averaged all year.
Right.
This season, it's dropped to half of that. And so during that span, it's just been kind of interesting that, you know, they've been able to take care of business this year. And I think that's what's kept them situationally better than other teams. This game, it got chippy. It seemed like our players just got caught up in some of that sort of trash talk going back and forth. And honestly, it didn't just stop, the discipline didn't stop there. It was also like on kickoff coverage. It was also on some of these other aspects of the game where it just, you know, once again, it just was bizarre to see UTSA play like that. And let me already just start off by saying it wasn't from like, you know, backups or second or third strings. We're talking about starters that were having this issue. So certainly something that was, I think, raised an eyebrow, but I think as we talk things out, we'll probably see that there's other pieces in here that probably led to some of that.
Sure.
So with that, I mean, let's just start talking about the UTSA offense right away. You know, overall, I think the first half they played really well. I mean, they came out and bludgeoned a really good San Diego State defense. You know, they've talked about how great that rushing defense was. You start out with 92 yards rushing on the ground on the first half, then 122 yards passing. A nice balance there in terms of just numbers, but I thought like they did a good job of kind of controlling, you know, San Diego State on defense. And the only problem I thought I had was that it just seemed sort of at times the play calling got a little wonky. It just it didn't make sense. There was no continuity. You're used to seeing some of these rushes over and over, and I get that sincere back there, but it's not like you had some freshman blue, you know, just fresh-eyed guy.
Brendan Brady was really doing well in the run game in that first drive in particular. So, you know, and in the first half in particular, you know, he was doing well. And it was kind of interesting to see later in the game, they sort of moved away from the run game when it didn't seem like there were significant adjustments happening from San Diego State's D-line to stop those, you know, holes. I mean, maybe if you go back and break it down on film, you'll see something different, but it just seemed like we shifted our play calling instead of sticking with what was working and what worked really well in that first drive, at least.
It felt like the fourth down calls were what like changed the offensive game plan, which was bizarre because why would that fourth down? I mean, it's 4th and 1, you get stuffed. Okay, well, I mean, you win for it. You know, you would have gone with a different call, but regardless of that, like why aren't you, to your point, sticking what got you here? It kind of goes back to like what we were talking about in the championship game, right? Like in what we kind of talked about with West Wing was like, you know, what's the toughest thing to do? Well, when you've gotten to this championship game and all of a sudden, you know, you're getting blown out or things aren't going your way, and then all of a sudden you decide, we're just going to redo everything we've done all season. So I thought it was weird. I mean, we end up with 214 total yards in the first half, 1 for 5 on third down. You know, again, there was a couple of, you know, trick plays that were called. It seemed like it kind of disrupted things, but then I think you saw it in the second half, as you were already alluding to, the fact that the play calling got kind of odd as the game wore on, because look, we end up with 25 yards rushing, in the second half and 149 yards passing, 174 yards total. But here are some of the key stats. 0 for 4 on third downs. We were 1 for 1 on fourth down, but the thing is that normally, and I'm not big on third down stats because it doesn't always paint the full picture. Mm-hmm. But I think in this case, it started telling you that all of a sudden UTSA went away from things that were successful or put themselves in situations that were much more difficult because they were 0 for 4 on third downs, and that's not normally the trend for them. If they're in third downs, it's usually a third, medium, or short, and they convert.
Yeah, and I don't have an issue with Traylor going for it on fourth down if it's a fourth and short. That 4th and 7, which I think was in the first half of the game, to me seemed a little bit odd for him to go on fourth down there, especially when I think we were in range for Hunter at that point to go for a field goal. And if we were, it just didn't...
It was pushing it, but it was close.
It wasn't like we were, asking him for a 60-yard field goal, I don't believe.
No.
But, when you have someone who's as good as Hunter, you would expect them to go for a field goal at that point and get some points rather than, kind of try to go for it when it just didn't seem like it was, necessary. It was early in the game. You've got a good special teams. I don't know. Now, some of the other fourth downs that he went for, okay, I get that, but I just thought he was being a little aggressive in the beginning of the game and then became, it's like he almost shied away then afterwards. He had some kind of odd plays afterwards, but it was almost like, he wanted to be aggressive, it didn't work out, and then, I don't know, like he changed his play calling in some respects.
I don't know if desperate seems like a good word to use because that's what it seemed like. Like we're trying to milk every single point out of this, yet we're not giving ourselves an opportunity to do so.
Right.
But I think to your point, that play, that 4th and 7, if you're not going to go for the field goal or you think it's just out of his range, and I think it was around the 36-yard line, so it's about a 53-yarder. It is
at the top of it, yeah.
Very top of Hunter's range. So I get like not wanting to go for it, and I think go for the field goal. I understand that, and I get going for it on fourth down. However, I think let's go back and say, you're right. How about we try to pin him just deep? You've got a really good punter in Lucas Dean, so why not try to pin him there and force them to drive out of their own end zone? And, obviously we can sit here and just go back and forth and do some what ifs, but, I still think that the point you brought up is completely fair. Why didn't we lean on the defense at that point? Mm-hmm. But going back to the offense, look, one of the things we talked about in the preview is that Cam Thomas was their all-star defensive end. I thought that we were going to try to double team him, do all sorts. We went one-on-one with him. Spencer Burford handled him, and I think I whispered to you early on, I was like, he's going one-on-one with him and he's winning, and it's not even a close contest. And I don't think I'm the only one that saw that, but, it was just really interesting to see that here's this guy who's, sort of this really renowned pass rusher, and he was being handled, by a Conference USA offensive lineman. And I'm not trying to diminish anybody by saying that, but that's the view, right? That, all these other conferences have much better players in Conference USA, yet here was Spencer Burford showing why he's got some NFL draft stock because he handled this guy. They handled Jonah Tavai for the most part too, up in the middle. They both started having more of an influence in the second half, but I think that was more because of the play calling, because at that point, things were kind of getting really weird and we couldn't seem to decide whether we were going to run some more or there was going to be some more passing. And, again, I feel like the play calling really lacked consistency as the game wore on. Mm-hmm. It just felt like we're not really sure if we want Frank to be passing the ball. We're not really sure if we want him to be, calling more runs. But you know what? We're just going to pass the ball and just hope for the best. And, I said that secondary was rated low, but I didn't feel like we really took a lot of advantage of that secondary. Right. If we're talking, you talked about Brendan Brady playing well. So did BJ Daniels. But again, he didn't get that many snaps, which I thought was weird. Traylor again talked about, hey, we're going to have a running back by committee, essentially. Brendan Brady, B.J. Daniels.
And
he
he
said,
talked
Kedrick
about,
Cobbs.
Yeah, Kedrick Cobbs. And did he even come in?
No, there was no snap count of him being in there. So it was interesting to see Brendan get so many offensive snaps, which I'm fine with. I mean, it was going to be his final game anyway. But B.J. Daniels, also his final game, they both showed success. Why aren't you trying to kind of build on that success and really to make it easier for Frank to kind of manage the offense?
Yeah, along with that, I was surprised that we didn't see Frank really attempting to run. You know, I kind of felt like that would be something else that we would see, given that Sincere was out, you know, and we all know that Frank can, you know, rip off these long runs when he wants to do it.
It would have been interesting to see him do that just to really, you know, catch them off balance. But in the opportunities he had to run, he didn't take them. Now, there were some issues with the turf.
Yeah.
You know, Traylor said it afterwards. And
we did see, I was going to say, we saw Frank, you know, fall a couple of times. I mean, it just slipped and then got sacked, but...
Yeah, but it was going on both teams, right? Like, though I thought it was bizarre, and, you know, maybe if we rewatch the game a million times, maybe we can see what it was. But Lucas Johnson didn't seem to have that problem.
Right.
And he's a quarterback for, you know, San Diego State. So kind of weird that he didn't seem to have problems, but Frank was, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I looked at Frank's feet a couple times, and I didn't feel like he was taking, like, huge steps or making huge strides. It just seems like he went to plant his back foot, and the one you were talking about, I think it was a third down, he just slips. And so just odd. I thought, though, overall, Frank played well. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, yeah, he didn't run as much. There's probably something that we're going to need to work on the off season. But I will say he did leave some throws out there. He has done that before. It's not the first time. You know, every quarterback leaves some throws out there. But there was this one call, and, you know, I'm just going to call this out. It's just something if people want to go back and look at, or maybe somebody else noticed this as well. But there was a tunnel screen call to Josh Cephas in the second half. In the second quarter. So it's to Frank's right. But it looked like B.J. Daniels went in motion, and he's up at the top of the screen. I believe he's up there with J.T. When he's there, there's the outside linebacker. It looks like he's coming in on a blitz, and he sure does blitz. Mm-hmm. And I think it was one of the defensive end kind of falls back a little bit. But it didn't matter because up at the top of the screen, you had, like I said, J.T. and Daniels, and there was only one cornerback over there. There was no secondary help. And I think those are the opportunities that, like, you know, when we talk about Frank needing to kind of keep progressing, I get that there was that tunnel screen call over here to the right. But it would be really great if you recognize that there's a problem over here. And if you've got one cornerback, figure out how to audible.
Right.
Certainly opportunity for growth there, but that was one that I really felt like, you know, could come back and kind of haunt a little bit if you go back and watch that play. Let me ask you this, though, because we already kind of talked about the play calling. Do you think that play calling hampered Frank, you know, in the game more than we want to admit?
In some ways, I'd say yes. I mean, it seemed like, I don't know, again, you know, I can't tell if some of those plays were RPO plays and Frank just elected to throw versus run, or if they were designed pass plays. I'm not going to pretend to be an X's and O person.
Yeah.
But it seemed like Frank was throwing more than he probably needed to in this game. There were opportunities, I felt like, where he probably could have run just to kind of keep San Diego State, you know, keep them on their toes a little bit. So, you know, they went from really trying to, you know, defend both the pass and the run game, which allowed us to open up, you know, some of those lanes for Brendan Brady and B.J. Daniels in the first part of the game. And then it just seemed like we switched to passing really consistently and running very little. And so then it allowed their defense to adjust to that. And it feels like if we would have been able to engage Frank more in the run game, you know, and or if we would have just stuck with the run game a little bit more in the second half, you know, that we might have been more successful and coming back. I mean, it really felt like we were in the game until the fourth quarter. Part of it was, San Diego State was taking a lot of time with the clock. And so, I felt like, okay, well, maybe they're relying on the passing game because they're trying to get these quick drives, where they're really trying to score fast. And so, you can't obviously do that when you're running the ball. But it just felt like if they could, kind of throw in a little bit more, Frank might have been able to get the offense in a rhythm and get us to the point where, we could, get back to playing like we were in the first half, because I really felt like we were very successful in the first half, and then the second half we just kind of got in this rut and we could never get out of.
All fair points. I mean, honestly, I thought that with Frank kind of having to pass more, to your point, I felt like it reduced his effectiveness, because that's not really the game plan. He's
a dual threat quarterback, so you got to have the dual part of the dual threat.
I mean, Traylor's always talked about being run first, and this isn't the first time we played without Sincere. Last year against UTEP, they played without Sincere, and they played with essentially less depth than they did now at running back. Mm-hmm. Yet it just felt like I would say the coaching staff kind of just overthought things and decided, right, we've got to pass. They seemed to become more desperate than I think the players were.
Yeah, and they sort of threw in those trick plays at kind of weird times. Like, there have been times when we have had trick plays and they've been very successful. But when you have trick plays frequently, like, that just, it doesn't work out, because then everybody's looking for it.
Right. And again, I think that those trick plays being thrown in there, which is great and it's fun because it's a bowl game, but I felt like it ruined some of the consistency. Again, you usually had about one or two trick plays during a game. They threw in 2 trick plays in the championship game, but that felt like the most that we ever do. Normally, we're just sticking to our bread and butter, right?
Right.
It felt like this game, there was going to be another trick play coming and, something else to try to throw off San Diego State. And San Diego State, I think, is too good of a team. I think if you're playing a 6-6 or a 7-7 or 7-5 team, mm-hmm, something you can take advantage of. But against a San Diego State team that, as much as we talked about, was a really good team. So, right, as much as we say, well, they don't look that great on offense, they don't look that great in this other spot, they're still, we're 11-2, so it wasn't like they were slouches coming into this game. So I will say, player of the game for me on offense was Spencer Burford. Like I said, handled Cam Thomas and really showed that he had that kind of draft stock, and really was impressive to me. I wish we could have more time with Burford, but right. What can you do? Let's talk defensive stats. First half for San Diego State, 44 rushing yards, 218 passing. They're at 262 total, 1 for 5 on third downs. Second half, 112 and 115, 227 total, so less, but they're 4 for 5 on third downs. Mm-hmm. Look, that 112 I think was huge, because as we started kind of getting battered by all of their running backs, and we talked about the fact that they had a stable of running backs, that really started kind of wearing this defense down. And I think some of that slipping, and then I'm going to go back to the penalties. There were some just awful penalties from our team. Whether it was, our secondary, which struggled throughout this game, to even, I remember Clarence Hicks had one where he hit Lucas Johnson late, and I think it was it was on a third down. Mm-hmm. So it's those moments where you're just like, where is the team from before? Like, I know we've only been off for 2 weeks, but, where is that discipline that you showed all season? I do feel like there was some of that kind of hurt the defense. That said, I know that Traylor had previously said that this team has weaknesses and they do everything they can to, really attempt to kind of cover those up. It's clear that our secondary has a lot of weaknesses. I'm a subscriber for Alamo Dome Audible. Jared does these, great, post-game sort of film breakdowns. One of the things he saw was that San Diego State was essentially motioning a receiver to get locked up on Antonio Parks, and Antonio Parks just was having problems covering. Mm-hmm. First half, he just had so many issues, and it really wasn't just him. Honestly, looking at the whole game, Corey Mayfield struggled. Ken Robinson, who I really thought was one of our top cornerbacks, struggled throughout. And again, I think the narrative might be that these guys have played a long season and, they were playing an abnormal amount of snaps, but it's the same amount of snaps they've played all season. So, while there was certainly a lack of depth probably at secondary, I would also say that I don't know that our guys were necessarily as focused and into the game because they seem to get locked into a lot of, extracurricular activities with San Diego State. And you know what? San Diego State, as much as they had more penalties than UTSA, they seem to stay locked in and were able to really execute at the right times. But, going back to Antonio Parks, man, it was a disappointing, I think, end to his career at UTSA.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, in the first half, you had Antonio Parks and Kelechi starting because Rashad Wisdom was out. And, Kelechi really seemed to step up his game. I mean, he had a couple of challenging games at the beginning of the season. He's been the backup for Antonio Parks all season, I believe. I think he was backing up Antonio, not Rashad. But anyways, he really came in and seemed to play pretty well in the first half. And so then it seemed like they almost started to gravitate more towards Parks because Parks, it's like they targeted Kelechi at first thinking, well, Kelechi's not someone who plays very often, so we'll throw his direction or we'll go his direction thinking that, he was going to make mistakes. And then when he was playing well and was really getting a lot of tackles, it seemed like they kind of shifted over to Parks and said, okay, he's the opportunity. We're just going to stay here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it happens during games where you realize here's the spot we want to attack. And, good coordinators are going to find that and they're going to take advantage of it. So I will say what really got me during this game is that Lucas Johnson, as much as I said was an average quarterback, this UTSA defense made him look just terrific.
Right.
And I think the biggest problem was while the pass rush was getting there was no contain. So as soon as he broke contain, he was able to essentially roll out and then the secondary can't keep up with some receiver for that long. Jared said as much during his breakdowns. But here's the deal. Without the contain, you're going to have to be disciplined. I think we could have lived with some more Lucas Johnson scrambles. Instead, Jesse Matthews, who, again, is not really an explosive receiver, just went off. I mean, he just seemed to be open most of the game. And I don't understand, how we would have allowed that. That was, I think, more not only just a failure from the players at times, but I think it was also just left failure. Like what was going on with the safeties? What was going on, cornerbacks? I think Nick Graham's got some questions there as well. It's like what happened here that our guys seem to really falter. I mean, I think we've got some posits of ours for this, but for the most part, I feel like we let one get away from a team that I think was about as evenly matched as us, and we just didn't execute like we have all season.
Yeah, I also wonder on the defensive side what exactly happened to Dadrian Taylor, because he was in the game at the beginning, but then at some point obviously got injured because we really didn't see him throughout the second half of the game. So, I wonder if he was sick or if he got injured or what happened. But I think if he had been his normal self, we probably would have seen some big plays because we really didn't see that big signature play, from the defense like we've seen in years past. Yeah. Or games past, I shouldn't say years past, games past.
Yeah, no, that's fair. With that, I think the player of the game is Clarence Hicks. He did continue to be his normal disruptive self. The only problem is that, again, the turf monster came up and got him a few times. Then he had that costly penalty, but, that doesn't really stop you from being a player of the game. You obviously have an effect, and it felt like he was getting there. He just, really couldn't get to Lucas Johnson and make that big play to your point right now. Let's go on to the special teams real quick and finish off this section with that. No issues with the kicking. Both Lucas and Hunter were fine. But that kickoff coverage, again, I earlier said there was, lack of discipline from this team. And it proved to be costly because, coming out of halftime, it's 17-14. We forced San Diego State to make a long drive, and I think we're good. but we kick it off and we allow a return past the 50 and essentially into UTSA territory. So they're about starting around like 47, 48 yard line. And this wasn't really the first time this happened. It happened multiple times. You think it was, I don't know. What do you think it was?
I'm not sure, but honestly, whatever it is, it's something they absolutely have to figure out this spring, because, we can't continue to do that next season, especially as the schedule gets harder.
Right, and I thought it was just interesting that, again, you have a young team, and you would imagine that they would have been a little bit more in tune with everything. But I think that's where Traylor is going to go back and look at this game and say, here's some opportunities that we had, and this was it right here. And, we'll see what other kind of conversations he has with some of these guys. We'll talk a little bit more about, transfer portal and,
right.
Some of that, some of the seniors that are staying. But, any last thoughts here?
Yeah, two things. One, we didn't talk about this earlier in the offense, but I am going to blame Frank Harris's interception on our friend Lopez, not on Frank, because he had literally said right before that play that he was surprised that Frank hadn't thrown an interception, because he felt like some of the balls, that he was throwing were kind of lofting up in the air. And literally the words had just come out of his mouth. The next play, there was an interception. So I feel like Lopez spoke that into existence. It's not necessarily Frank's issue. But then the other thing was, I really did, even though, we didn't start out the second half as dominant as we had the first half. And, we went into halftime down 17-14, but I wasn't really concerned about it at that point. I felt good in the beginning of the third quarter. But in the fourth quarter, when I saw that Santa packed up his Triangle of Toughness flag and headed up the stands and left and said Christmas was canceled, it's kind of when I felt like, all right, the game's over.
Yes, we did have Santa, UTSA Santa, in our section at the very bottom of our section, and he was getting the crowd all riled up, and then all of a sudden he decided to call it a...
He called it a game, man. He was out of there.
I guess he needed to get to Christmas Eve quickly, so... All right, so what did we learn from the game?
DFW is not a friendly place for the Roadrunners to play.
It is not.
No. We are now 1-6 when playing in the Metroplex, with the one win being the 2013 game at UNT, the Ice Bowl. Since then, not been pretty.
We've been up there a couple times for the Metroplex to watch those games. It's an easy travel, I guess. But I feel like, after that first win in 2013, it's like we felt like there'd be more wins in the Metroplex. So we've been going back up there just to see the next Metroplex win. Hasn't happened. No. But you've got something else to think about.
Well, here's the thing. We're going to be adding SMU to the schedule.
Right.
So we're going to go from one game every 2 years to either one game every year or 2 games every 2 years. And, obviously there's always bowl potential in the DFW area. So we got to get this figured out so that every trip back to Dallas is not disappointing.
Okay.
I enjoy going up to Dallas. I've got friends there, family there. But I don't enjoy it, particularly when we play poorly in bad weather, because it seems like it's either brutally hot, very cold, rainy, so I would just appreciate us, getting an opportunity to win in DFW and maybe have some mild weather. That would be nice.
Maybe an October SMU trip.
I would take the win over the weather, first of all, but,
Yeah, I gotcha.
The other thing I feel like we already talked about a little bit, but you don't want to get too cute and have trick plays in every game. It's funny because we've heard Traylor in past press conferences talk about, our game calling, we got too cute here, or we got too cute there. He didn't say it this time after the game, but I definitely felt like this was the one time when it would really have been warranted for him to say that. I think trick plays are great, when they're executed well, when they're unexpected, but when they become an expected play, there's a lot of film on those plays, and you have teams looking for them. And San Diego State, like you mentioned, is a good team. They likely were looking for those plays, and and were then able to stop us from executing on them.
They stayed quite disciplined at times. And, when you have the little, like, the Josh Cephas pass, trick play, like, again, to your point, it's been seen, and these guys know. I mean, we can't look at San Diego State and continue to make them seem like they weren't very good. They were a very good team.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just their offense wasn't very special. We made them special. So
Right. I mean, I think they scored more points in this game than they have in almost in any game this season. If it wasn't the highest scoring game, it was one of the highest scoring games that they've had all season.
Yeah.
The other thing is definitely for next year, we need to look at how to find or develop guys in the secondary. We've already talked a lot about, some of the issues that we've had, but, it's clear that that's going to be an area where we're going to need to have depth next year and replace talent that we're losing in Tariq.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then, my last thing as we go back into the safety kind of discussion is the in-stadium announcer could not pronounce Kelechi's name to save his life, and he was probably the most excited person in the stadium when Rashad Wisdom went in the second half, just because he didn't have to figure out how to say Kelechi, because he never actually could say.
I was going to say, he never did. So
Kelechi, in what you want. He was like, at some point I was just expecting him to say, yeah, that guy.
Yeah, number 11 on defense with UTSA. It was, because you're right, because obviously on the telecast, when we were rewatching it, you could hear it every now and then, and we kind of.
But the announcers on the telecast said his name correctly.
Yeah, I mean, because they've also seen him before.
Right. I
would say, but even to that announcer just seemed like he was going to get even more creative each time, because you're right, every single time was a little different the way he said it, and I half expected to what you just said right now. It's just, hey, that guy number 11 on UTSA's defense.
He probably was like taking it just a sigh of relief when he saw Rashad Wisdom in there. He's like, whew, I can say that name. All right, before we go, one of the things I wanted to talk about, you and I have mentioned before on this podcast that we listened to JJ Perez and Greg Luca do their wrap-up after the game. And there were two things in their wrap-up that I kind of wanted to talk about here and get your thoughts on.
Sure.
The first was that there was an interesting comment, I felt like, from JJ at the end of the recap, where he mentioned that there may be a quarterback competition in the spring. Given that we know that Frank is coming back next year, I thought that was kind of an odd comment for him to make, because to me it would seem like the assumption is Frank Harris is going to be the starter. What did you make of his commentary?
Yeah, it was bizarre. I think we both kind of arched our eyebrows a little bit, like, is there something here? But,
is he trying to create a controversy, or is there a controversy, I guess is the question.
I think it's more just creating a little hoopla around Eddie Lee. I think, we've seen glimpses of Eddie Lee this season, and I think that hype kind of builds, right? Like, as much as I love Josh Atkins, right? Why do I love him? Because he's the backup. Because he always seems like the fun answer to any issue you have with Frank Harris, right? Like, that's the guy. So, you've got this talented, kid off the bench here who's been the third stringer this year. Why not kind of hype him up a little bit? So I think that's a little bit to it. It is interesting though, right? Like, I mean, why bring it up?
I mean, you almost kind of wonder too. I mean, we know that Lowell is in the transfer portal. We haven't heard what Adkins' status is going to be, but it seems like he's probably not going to come back for a super senior season. So it's also, I guess, kind of that question mark of, should we anticipate that Traylor may try to bring somebody in from the portal to be that backup, to be the second string? Or is it going to be Frank and Eddie Lee battling it out for first string, and then, whoever we have, freshman, Cam Peters, or whatever, kind of in that third string position?
I mean, I think if you're going to bring in somebody, I don't think you're looking for a big name, because then you'd have to unseat Frank as well, right? Like,
and it just doesn't seem bizarre. I mean, given the fact that he started all season and that he was really able to take up his game a notch, it just doesn't seem like that would be the direction you'd want to go. Right.
I think you put Eddie Lee as the backup and you give him those snaps so that way he can start getting used to that. I think the hype is there for Eddie Lee, like I said before, but I also think that it might be just an opportunity to keep him away from the transfer portal. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think he's looking at the transfer portal, just from what we know and, from what we've seen from him all year, especially after just a freshman season where it's not like he could have been the starter.
Right.
But, you never know what some of these players are thinking. And, it's something that I think UTSA fans need to get used to is the fact that there are going to be guys that are going to come in, maybe kind of hyped a little bit, some top recruits, and then they're just going to decide to go. And it's fair because, you come to UTSA and maybe you realize you really don't want to be in San Antonio. You want to be somewhere else closer to home. So, tons of reasons why it could happen, but, let's just see what happens. But it is interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah, the other thing they talked about was, sort of the feeling of the bowl game, and that, it didn't seem like, first of all, that they felt like there was the same energy or excitement from the team about the game. The atmosphere didn't feel like a must-win. Greg Luca referenced Brendan Brady making this comment that if they had won, it would be the cherry on top. And so it kind of sparked a conversation about, are bowl games glorified exhibition games, or are bowl games, kind of seen as the pinnacle of the season? And, we saw a lot of different reactions from fans as people started announcing that they weren't going to be playing. Now, there were a lot of assumptions that some of the players that didn't play were because they opted out. But in a lot of cases, I think there were probably situations where they couldn't play either from injury or illness. The only players we know really opted out of the game for sure were Tariq and Sincere. Everyone else, we don't really know what their situation was.
Yeah.
But, kind of prompted this dialogue about college football in general and how people view the bowl games and how fans view the bowl games. And, I think there are a lot of fans that look at these bowl games as the pinnacle of the season, the must win. They've spent money to travel to watch this team. And so they put expectations that maybe the players themselves don't really have on themselves. And so I think, in my opinion, fans need to approach this more as if it's an exhibition game. Like, this is an opportunity for you and your family to go and your friends to go and travel somewhere fun, maybe somewhere you've never been before, and, to watch a bowl game and to have fun with fans sort of celebrating the success of the season, not looking at this as if it's a championship game, because I don't think that in general college football looks at it that way anymore.
I don't think they've ever looked at that. I mean, I think this is new territory for UTSA fans because you never had somewhere to actually go and kind of, like you said, travel to. So I think this bowl experience is something new. The first one was Albuquerque. I mean, that doesn't sound like somewhere, like a destination you would say, oh, I really want to go to Albuquerque. But when we got there, it was a fun place to be at. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was, some good food, some great sights. And I think that's what the bowl experience is exactly like, is how you described it, I think, the first way, which is it's a celebration of the season. It's not the pinnacle, but it, for the most part, is just a celebration of the season. You get 15 extra practices. You get guys an opportunity to, go somewhere. They get some gifts. There should be some essentially like bowl experiences for the fans. Mm-hmm. And then you go to the bowl game and you just have a lot of fun. Now that you have the playoffs, well, but how many teams are going to be in the playoffs? It's not like you're going to have everybody, right? I mean, it's not like the CUSA winner should be in the playoffs, right? So if that's not the case, going back to what you said, I really feel like, there's got to be some expectation set from UTSA. And the pinnacle of the season was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when it was the conference championship game, because right. That is what means something. You are forever going to be a conference champion. Right. If you win the Frisco Bowl, no one's going to be like, oh my God, you guys won the Frisco Bowl in 2021? Holy cow. Or you guys won the First Responder Bowl in 2020? You guys won the New Mexico Bowl in 2016. I mean, I can keep going back, but I mean, that's the thing, is that's right. Not something that somebody puts up there, a banner, and says, hey, we won. Right. Nobody really cares about it. So, from a fan perspective, you can be upset at these players for opting out or for, all these other issues happening, but that's really on you. I mean, there was no pros on the 2016 team. Last year, there was COVID year, so people were were not really opting out on purpose. It was just that COVID was happening.
Right.
Our coach didn't even coach in the
And
coach there, right? So I think it's just new territory, and I think it's just something for UTSA fans to start getting used to.
Right. I mean, as you think about our future when we go into the AAC, the bowls that we're going to be eligible for are not going to be bowls that are probably within driving distance either. I mean, they're going to be destination bowls in a lot of cases. And so, they're going to be a bigger commitment for you to go to. So you need to kind of, in my mind, you need to think about it as, hey, this is a cool opportunity for us to go on vacation to a place that we probably wouldn't have traveled to otherwise, and to have fun with our friends and our family, and, have a bowl game. And if we win, that's even great. Even better.
Yeah, I mean, there's that Fenway Bowl that tie in with AAC. As of right now, if you've never been to Boston, it'd be a great trip. If you've never been to Fenway Park, it's a great trip.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it'd be a weird setup because we have been to Fenway Park.
Right.
But, it's just one of those, back to you, it's just one of those situations where, you need to think about, like, this is what blue blood programs, the Ohio States, the Michigan State, some of these other, even smaller colleges that go on a routine basis to bowls, like that's what the fans look forward to is, going to these different places to go watch their team play.
Well, and also given the fact that we've seen now, 3 bowls have had to cancel in the last couple of hours, I guess we should just be excited that we got to go to a bowl. Both of the teams played, even though we had, 20 to 25 people out, UTSA could have canceled, and, they didn't. We got to see the game. We were able to go to the game. It had the home feel to it. So, I just hope that everyone appreciates that, especially now that they see these other teams, that are having to have their bowl dreams canceled at the last minute.
Yeah, and can we just talk about real quick about how cool the stadium was? I mean, we've been there before to see a soccer game, but this really felt like a intimate location.
Right.
It just had that feel where you were like closer to the team than you've been able to have. I mean, you have opportunities at the Alamo Dome, but this one just felt different to me. I don't know. I guess it was just because it's a soccer stadium and it's set up differently, but it just felt really fun.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a great venue. It was great to see so many fans show up. I mean, it really did feel like a home game environment. At the end of the day, I think, really what we need to take away from this is that we had a great bowl experience. It was great to see the team have such a wonderful season all year. And you know what? Now there is something for them to chase next year because they're still chasing the dream of a bowl victory.
Yes. And one last thing, I will say, when you're going to a bowl, what's the coolest thing is also meeting new people. And we met a lot of new UTSA fans. So, I got to say, it's not something that I would give back because, it's something like coming back from the game, going to the hotel bar and sitting there and seeing all these people, with UTSA gear on. Mm-hmm.
Surrounding the one guy from San Diego State that's sitting at the bar.
But even that, like, we talk about those, the type of memories and some of the stuff that we've gotten from football. Like, when did you ever think you'd see, like, a bar full of people with UTSA gear on? Like,
right. Not when we went to college, anyways.
No.
Unless you were at Hills and Dales.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, but away from somewhere, like, traveling somewhere, I think that still, it's one of the coolest experiences. And I think, as you've brought up, all this whole bowl thing, that's got to be something that somebody also takes away from it, is either being in a restaurant, being in a bar, whatever it is, but being surrounded with people with UTSA gear on.
Yep. Couple of key announcements from players since the bowl game. No surprise, but Spencer Burford did announce that he is going into the NFL draft. We all pretty much knew that. He just hadn't made the formal announcement. Clarence Hicks and Brandon Rolfe also announced that they were going to declare for the draft. And then we did have a couple of super senior announcements right as the bowl was happening. Clifford Chapman announced that he'll be coming back for his super senior season. Dadrian Taylor has since announced that he will be back, which, big on the defense side to see both Taylor and Chatham coming back. And then Davis confirmed what Traylor had already said, that he will be back for his super senior season. I'm sure we'll see more announcements in the next coming days and weeks as we lead up to February signing day. We had one new announcement on the transfer portal. It was Clayton Jr.
Greg Clayton Jr.
Yeah, he was a wide receiver for us, but didn't really see very much playing time.
So again, backups that you'll see that, you probably may not have heard or known they were on the team, but, when you have such a loaded veteran team, some of these guys just don't have an opportunity to break onto the field, and, they got to find a spot somewhere else.
Yep. Thank you for joining us on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A-Toves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back soon to recap the season.
Birds up.